Hey everyone, welcome to Unfiltered Podcast, real conversations about church planting. My name is Lee Stephenson. I'm a church planter. I also serve as the executive director of church planting for Converge.
My name is Danny Parmelee, and I oversee church planting for Converge Mid-America. And I'm not planting a church right now, but I did plant at one time. So today we have kind of a special thing. Lee is planted for his second time. And so what I wanted to use our time today is kind of do a little bit of an interview time with you, Lee, and really digging into what it's like to plant for a second time. I think that church planters by nature are crazy, but those that plant two times bring crazy to kind of a new level. Like, oh, you didn't.
It's called stupid.
Yeah, like you didn't learn your lesson the first time. This is hard stuff, and yet we see that God has definitely blessed that by those that maybe have been just wired, and there's people out there that are serial planters. I don't know if you'd consider yourself that yet or not, but this is what I want us to do with our time is, especially for those that are just joining us, giving us a little bit of a snapshot of the first time you planted, so we kind of know where you're coming from, and then I'm going to ask, basically walk through 5 different questions with you.
Okay.
I'm going to be asking you about what's more challenging about doing it a second time. I'm going to be asking about the difference in the church planting landscape now in comparison to when you first planted. Going to look at the advantages, like what advantages do you have because you have planted before in the past? What was unexpected in your journey, and I know that you're still kind of fresh into it right now. And then finally, advice for guys thinking of doing it again, and that would be guys that are currently at a plant, or maybe those that planted a number of years ago, and for whatever reason they're now listening to this podcast and something's stirring in them. So why don't you start off, share with us a little bit about Harvest 1.0 years, kind of how it went, and then we'll jump into the questions.
Yeah, no, glad to. We started, our grand opening was August 23rd, 2009. And we started in Mesa, Arizona in a movie theater. Movie theater is in a great area, growing area of town. There just weren't other facilities even potential to even be in. All the schools had churches in them. So we landed in this movie theater. I'm kind of fond of the movie theater. Maybe it's just sentimental for the experiences that we had, but it went great. So we were in the movie theater for 2 years. We outgrew the theater at that point. We started day one with 2 services, which is a little crazy and non-traditional when it comes to planting, but we just felt impressed that people like options. And we felt like if we did our job right and got the word out, advertised well, we could have at least critical mass in those 2 services. And that's what happened. So we never, in our theater days, were without 2 services, but our services were 50 minutes long and only 10 minutes turnaround. So again, it was crazy, not necessarily ideal, but it worked. So we outgrew the movie theater, and then we moved into high school on our second anniversary. The high school is about a mile down the road. We were in the high school about 9 months. We ended up having to go from 2 services to 1 service. And that actually was more challenging to our people and to us in the church setting. But part of it is the facility required it. So we went from 220 seat movie theater, maxed out, to 1,300 seats in the auditorium in the Performing Arts Center at this high school. So it just overwhelmed us in what we could do, and from that standpoint. 9 months into being in the high school, we were able to move into what was a church that had closed down, but it was really a foreclosed property. Like everything was overgrown, landscaping wise, weeds had taken over. The parking lot was a mess. Half the air conditioners didn't work. The carpet, paint, all that just needed to be redone. And we moved in there as tenants. And about 14 months later, finally convinced the owners of the facility to sell us the facility. And so we purchased that. We left, transitioned the church in 2015 to move into this role here in Orlando, Florida. When I left the church, we were about 4 services on the weekend, over 1,000 people in attendance, and just seeing a large number of people come to Christ and get baptized throughout the year. About 40, we did a survey, about 40% of our adults had no previous church background before coming to Harvest. And that was great, because that's really the desire by which we planted that church.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Awesome. And then, so with this first question, really what I'm trying to get at is people would maybe assume if you do anything a second time, it's automatically more easier and everything's easier about it. But doing it a second time, what actually makes it more challenging in the sense, or maybe it's not, maybe there's not that, but is there anything that makes it more challenging because you have already?
Great question. I would say it's a both and on that, Danny. That part of it does bring an element of peace. I would use that phrase, but also angst that you have been through it. So you do know what you're going to get into. And so there's a part of it going, I don't really want to have those conversations again. I don't want to have to face this again. But on the hindsight, you know they're coming, which the first time you go, I didn't know I was going to have this conversation. So now you can kind of see it before it actually even arrives, which I do think is a gift in and of itself. I do think you can underestimate it and think, well, I've done this before, and you can relax going into the plant. And I think that's a detriment. I think you have to work just as hard, and it's just as frustrating, and the challenges are going to be there just as they were the first time around. They'll show up differently, but it's going to be very real. If, for instance, in this situation, we didn't have to plant in a traditional portable situation. So we have a facility, we're tenants. We can leave our stuff up 3 out of 4 weeks, typically out of the month. About once a week, once a month, maybe twice a month, we have to remove everything from the stage, that kind of stuff. So that's ideal from that standpoint. The facility that we're in was made for a church in a lot of ways. But with that has come a different expectation from people that come in the door. They come in with the expectation that you're an existing church and you have all the services because they see the facility and they automatically assume you're this level of a church, when in the reality is going, we're 11 weeks old. Like, we don't have everything that you're thinking we have. Our volunteers are doubling up to fill the services and the children's ministry and make coffee, and people aren't as patient as they were sometimes with us when we were in a movie theater. Like, there was a sense of going, yeah, they're new, they haven't made it, they're getting the kinks worked out. And the reality in our situation, the building's been under construction for the first 7 weeks of the plant. So even on our grand opening, we didn't have AC. The AC went out. Lights weren't necessarily working the way they were supposed to.
Do you need AC in Florida or not?
You need AC in Florida. We didn't get the lights and the sound working until 2 days before our grand opening. Mm-hmm. Like, when I mean working, I mean on. Like, the power was on to those things. So we were literally in that morning trying to EQ the system, knowing it's not going to be perfect when everybody comes in at a grand opening, because we hadn't had a chance to really go through it and dial all those pieces in. But people's expectation was it's going to be perfect. Yeah. The sound quality is going to be right. The volume is going to be dialed in. And it was all, we were literally building the plane in the air in this situation.
Yeah. Cool.
For us too, 2.0 has been more difficult from the standpoint, I would say, the spiritual warfare, and I don't know what else to contribute it to. The spiritual warfare around this plant has been more severe, quicker, and earlier in the plant than we experienced in the first plant. It was there, it was real in the first plant, but most of it really started hitting us about year one. Mm-hmm. This started pre-launch and is carried into the first 10 weeks of the new church.
Well, that's helpful. Let's talk a little bit about church planning landscape. So I know it's not that far, 10 years, but I would say the church planning environment kind of really kind of took off 2000s-ish. And so everything still has been kind of fresh and new. And now there's multiple networks, multiple denominations, and church planting is, at least even amongst the non-Christian world, is even a little bit more known. So what would you say has changed in the landscape for you now as a planter planting in the second time? Like, hey, now the second time around, man, this is different, because back then, I don't know, we had to explain even what church planting was to people, or, well, now it's hard because there are other church plans going on. So people are all fighting for the same launch team members. I don't know what's changed in the landscape from a planter perspective.
A couple things that we've experienced. One, I would say technology. So technology has changed significantly when it comes to web, when it comes to design, when it comes to video production. There's just a higher expectation and quality expectation that I think people coming into church expecting to see. That we didn't necessarily have the same type of pressure that we had before with that. Maybe that's because of the movie theater building situation too, but I do think technology, the increase in technology, is both helps, but it also can become a hinder in some ways in the church planning standpoint. I do think raising money for church planning is just always hard. Mm-hmm. And I felt like there were pieces of it that were difficult the first time around. This time around, I would say it's been a little bit more difficult raising money, mm-hmm. partly because I think, number one, a lot of the people I've reached out to, I exhausted the first time around. So even though it was successful, they're sitting there going, yeah. But in some cases, there were other people that said, no, we've been blessed and we're thankful that, we believe in you and the vision. Mm-hmm. We've seen success, and so we want to invest in that. But I do think there's an element that the fundraising has been a little bit more challenging, difficult for this plant.
What would you say biggest advantage having done it before? Is it the tactical experience? Is it the just knowing what you're getting into? What's kind of the advantage of having planted before?
We talked about in a previous podcast, like that there are three crises every church planter is going to face. Mm-hmm. That you're going to face a personal, leadership, and a financial crisis. I think this time around, knowing that those are coming, it allows you to prepare your heart, but prepare systems and structures around that. So that way, when it does happen, you feel more supported walking through those moments.
Yeah. What systems? You said systems. Like what are some practical things going into church planning the second time? Like, you know what, I'm going to put this in place so that when this does happen, I'm ready.
I'd say number one, having a backup preaching team early on has been helpful. A month into our church plant, I was out having knee replacement surgery. So I preached 4 weeks, and then I'm out practically a month. Yeah. And so knowing that ahead of time, knowing that this was going to be part of our story, and how God was going to write our story in the church, it was important to be ahead of the game, to have people ready, able to fill in, that you knew like the quality wasn't going to drop off just because you weren't there, and that they would help support the vision of what the new church was about.
Yeah, and I heard that you had some world-class, phenomenal preachers during that time. Is that right?
I had a couple, and I had one that was a little questionable. So,
well, thanks for letting me fill in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, on the financial standpoint, you have a different understanding of how to protect your finances. You see trends a little quicker than I saw trends before, and realize, is this a normal trend just because it's this time of the year, or is this a abnormal trend and we need to make some cuts, or we need to change some spending habits now before it becomes a problem later on?
Mm-hmm. So you talked a lot about expectations already, probably more than even tactical, like, oh, well, now I know how to, do a launch team meeting, or now I know how to do a marketing plan. What though was for you the most unexpected thing going through it the second time?
Oh man. I think one was just given the environment and where we're located this time around, we are, and this will sound weird saying this, but try to hear what I'm saying, and not what I'm not saying. Um, we're planting in a community where there are, besides Converge, there are 4 other quality Christian ministries in our community. So you've got big ones like Cruise National International Headquarters is in direct vicinity of where we're planting. You have Wycliffe's International Headquarters. You've got Pioneers. You've got Reliant Ministry. And so part of our challenge in this time around, and we kind of saw it coming before it hit us, was how do we keep the culture pure, knowing that we're probably going to have an influx of experienced professional Christians coming in the door, but we're not planning a church to reach them. Like we're planning a church to reach those that are far from Christ and those that are our neighbors, and nobody's reaching those people. So knowing that the conversations that we were going to have with church people were going to be difficult and hard and needed to be clear right up front of this is why we exist. This is our mission. And that has been proven to be true. We didn't have a lot of that the first church because there just weren't a whole lot of Christians directly in our community. And so we were building right off the bat from that. And I know a lot of people would say, well, that's great. You got giving, you got people that know how to serve. And I would say, well, you would think so. But the reality is that's not necessarily always true, because I do see a lot of people's mentality where it's like, well, I've done Christian work all week and I just want to come and relax. And so there is a gap, and sometimes there not for everybody, but I do see it quite often, a gap for people when it comes to giving and serving and supporting a new church, that of people that you think they should just get this. And so that's a challenge that we're facing and will continue to face for a while. And I've had guys even within the first couple of weeks walk in and we've talked about this before, that sometimes the hardest people to deal with are the church people early on in the life of your church plant. You need some, but you want mature ones that understand the vision and can support the vision. I had a guy came up and just without getting to know me, didn't want to know anything about the church, just started ranting off his complaints of all the different things that we were missing and the things that we weren't doing right. And I looked at him and said, it's good to meet you.
Right.
My name's Lee, and I understand your dilemma and what your expectations are and challenges. Here's what you need to know. It's not going to change.
Yeah.
This is who we are as a church, and this is where we're going as a church. I would appreciate it if you would have taken a chance to get to know us and know me a little bit more. Maybe your perspective would have been different. And I think that just totally shocked him. That nobody had ever actually talked to him that way and challenged him. And he just kind of got in his way in the church world and stuff of that sort. We didn't see him come back. Right. But I tried to do it in a gracious and nice way, but be direct and clear at the same time.
Yeah. Well, that's unfortunate, but man, that's just, that's part of it. It sounds like we could have a whole episode just on church people. So
exactly. Maybe we'll have to do that one. But I do the piggyback, even what I said earlier, the spiritual warfare around us this time around has been hard, and it's been challenging. And there've been a lot of days where you're sitting there going, Lord, and I remember these moments in the first time, but I feel like they came a whole lot quicker, a whole lot harder, where Melissa and I are like, one more thing. It's like, really? And just constantly trying to be on our knees, praying and asking the Lord, like, we need your strength to help us endure right now. Otherwise, we're not going to make it.
Yeah. All right. Finally, advice for guys thinking of doing it again.
Don't rely on the fact of how you did it the first time is going to work the second time. New environment, new people, different time, different age. You need to be sensitive to what the Lord is doing there in your life, in that moment, and in your community. Lean into that. Don't lean on the fact of, hey, this is the way we did everything before, and just expect it's going to carry directly over into this situation.
Oh, that's great. I think if you could speak to this too, is I think that for guys considering it a second time, that fear plays a big factor, both for those that were successful and that those that weren't. So for those that weren't successful, fear that it will quote unquote fail again. And then fear of those guys that were successful, like, well, what if this second one doesn't match up? Does that mean that my first one was lucky? So I don't know if you want to speak to that. And we know that that's a fleshly thing, but it's a real thing. I mean,
yeah. Boy, there's a lot I can say on that, Danny. We had to wrestle through that in our own lives, going, I've got a position with Converge as the executive director of church planting, overseeing national church planting. If I can't plant a church this time around, what are people going to think? So there is a very heightened sense of fear as we approach the potential of doing this, and so I get that what people may be feeling, thinking about doing it a second time, either successful or close to failure. Everywhere I read in the scriptures, God's people are not a people of fear.
Mm-hmm.
God's called us to be a people of faith. And we're not here to please people. We're here to carry out the mission of what God has called us to carry out. And so I do think we have to pay attention to our heart and what are the fleshly drives, and go, is this something God called me to in this season to do? If so, trust the fact that he's the one that's going to build his church. It's not you.
Mm-hmm.
None of us can build the church. We can do what God has called us to do. And I don't think any of us honestly want to build the church out of our own strength and our own flesh.
Mm-hmm.
We want to build it out of what God is doing and go where God is leading. It may not be successful. Are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I had to come back and realize I'm not a failure. Like, to me, a failure is not trying.
Right.
And I'm a child of God. First and foremost, that's my identity, not as a church planner or a failed church planner.
Yeah.
And so we leaned into that and just going, I'm going to try. God seems to open the doors and be leading us here. And so let's make it happen.
That's great.
So thanks, guys, for being with us. We're going to carry on the conversation in our next podcast as well, kind of leaning into some of these pieces. This has been Unfiltered. And until next time, guys, keep it real.